Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Reverse psychology. This is an image of a chair, and the notice says if you vote Zanu PF, your seat for the next 5 years. I believe this was produced by Zanu PF itself to make sure people go out and vote. It's called reverse psychology. Zanu PF has been rigging elections since the country's independence in 1980. So it is totally meaningless to say these last 43 years, people have been stuck with Zanu PF because they voted for the party. They didn't. The party has been rigging elections. That's precisely the point. The 2008 elections were a watershed. Some people do not understand that, but they were a watershed. It was the nearest the country's ever got to having free, fair, and credible elections. Because SADC had put Zanu PF under pressure before those elections to implement a number of significant changes. And the sum total of that was the Zanu PF vote rigging machinery was literally switched off for the March 2008 elections. The people for the first time voted in a free election. That's the nearest Zimbabwe had ever got to free, fair, and credible elections. The March 2008. But when the regime learned through its machinery that the opposition was going to win the March 2008 elections, Mnangagwa, and he says it himself, switched on the vote rigging machinery. ZEC were told that they must not declare the results. And for the next 6 weeks, the Zanu PF machinery took over the work of ZEC, recounting the votes. And it took them 6 weeks to recount 5 million votes. Of course, they were cheating. They managed to water down Morgan Tsvangirai's 73% of the votes to 47%, enough to force a runoff. And during the runoff, they used wanton violence directed at punishing the electorate for having rejected Zanu PF in the earlier vote. Even SADC, for the first time, could not accept Zanu PF as the legitimate government after those elections. And then they are the ones who forced Zanu PF to sign the 2008 Global Political Agreement, in which Zanu PF agreed to the need to implement a raft of democratic reforms. And they were forced to accept the formation of the government of national unity. The primary purpose of the government of national unity was to implement the democratic reforms, to make sure that the blatant cheating that had taken place during the 6 weeks of recounting 5 million votes, and then the wanton violence that took place during the runoff would never happen again. But what's the primary purpose of the GNU? Alas, not even a token reform was implemented in those 5 years. Not even a token reform. Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends with the trappings of power. And the rest was history. They forgot about reforms. They were convinced that they would win the 2013 elections without reforms. Zanu PF double agents were put to use to persuade Morgan Tsvangirai and company that they didn't need reforms. They could win the elections without even one meaningful reform. And Morgan Tsvangirai and company believed it. And for 5 years, they failed to implement even one meaningful democratic reform, not even one token reform. The truth of the matter is, they've been participating in these elections because Zanu PF has been offering them a few seats on the gravy train for them to participate. They knew that the election process was so flawed, they could never win those elections. Without reforms, you could never win elections in Zimbabwe. But MDC then, and now Triple C, have been participating regardless, because they also knew Zanu PF was giving away a few seats on the gravy train. And Zanu PF has made these sweet seats, few seats, particularly attractive. MPs and senators in Zimbabwe, when you get elected, doesn't matter how many times you may have been elected in the past, it doesn't matter. After each election, it's a clean page. Every elected MP or senator gets US $80,000 a car allowance. And since November, Mnangagwa has introduced another 40,000 housing allowance for every MP or senator who gets elected. This is over and above the very generous salaries and allowances these politicians get. MDC guys, after the 2013 elections, they met and had their party congress in 2014. They made a resolution that they would not participate in future elections without reforms. But within a year, they'd forgotten that resolution because they realized that there were some people there. If they were to stick to that, there were individuals who would leave the party, who would rather leave the party and take their chance in participating in these elections for a chance to win some of these few gravy train seats that are being offered as bait. That has been the case ever since. Each successive election has become clear these elections, you cannot win them. Zanu PF is rigging these elections, but the opposition are hell-bent on participating in those elections. Zanu PF needs the opposition to participate because it needs legitimacy. People have got to understand what happened in 2008 when Zanu PF, after the runoff, formed the government. Mugabe was sworn in, and SADC and the AU refused to recognize him as legitimate because of the blatant cheating in the March recounting and the blatant violence in the runoff. Zanu PF learned an important lesson then, that it cannot be business as usual. Up to that time, Zanu PF had firmly believed in a de facto one-party state and had ruthlessly pursued that notion. But after 2008, when they were forced to go into the GNU, Zanu PF realized that if it's going to rig the elections, it can go ahead, but it must maintain this facade that Zimbabwe is a healthy and functioning multi-party democracy. So Zanu PF needs the opposition to participate. And also, of course, the public to participate. There is no question that if the opposition refused to participate in this election, Zanu PF will get legitimacy. They will not. And by the same token, if ordinary Zimbabweans out there decided this is just a meaningless election process, they are not going to participate. SADC would not grant Zanu PF legitimacy. There can be no doubt about that. Then the country will be back to 2008. That is the one thing that Zanu PF would not, is afraid of. And so for the opposition, Zanu PF has taken care of that. It's offering them the few seats as members of parliament and senators. And we all know that winning those seats, the benefits are incredible. And so the appetite for the opposition has been sharpened. It's razor sharp. It is the task of the opposition to convince their supporters and the public that they can win these elections. And the opposition have been convincing their supporters by telling them they don't need reforms and free and fair elections because they have devised strategies of winning rigged elections. And the public and their supporters have been naive and gullible enough to keep believing in those lies. For 43 years, Zanu PF has rigged elections. And the opposition is, after each election, the opposition has never given an explanation as to why their strategies have failed. They will always offer some other explanation. A divided opposition is one of the favorite ones. We are not united. The truth of the matter is, it is not that. It is that Zanu PF has got control of every aspect of the electoral process to the point where they cannot lose those elections because they control everything. Every aspect of it, Zanu PF controls it. And to entice the members of the public to keep on participating in these elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy, they frighten them, reverse psychology. They tell the people, if you do not vote, you will punish yourself. This is the punishment. If you vote Zanu PF, as if to say the country has been stuck with Zanu PF all these years because they voted for Zanu PF, when in reality, that's not true. People have not been stuck with Zanu PF for the last 5 years because they voted for Zanu PF, but because Zanu PF rigged the elections. But they need the public to participate. And so they tell them it's because people voted for Zanu PF. And so people this year are going back to the elections convinced that they are going to vote Zanu PF out of office. In reality, of course, they are not voting because that result is already predetermined. Zanu PF is winning these elections already. The result is predetermined. But they need people to participate in these elections to give the process credibility. So people will think they are going to vote and they're going to get a result to get Zanu PF out, not knowing that they are voting to give Zanu PF legitimacy. This share, I believe, it was made by Zanu PF double agents. Its message is very simple and is very clear. People are motivated to go and vote so that they vote Zanu PF out, not knowing that they're actually voting to give Zanu PF legitimacy, because the result is already predetermined. A Zanu PF win is already predetermined. They're only voting to give the process legitimacy. In Shona, we've got a saying that Etsikam Cheche Yamwa, people will vote on the 23rd of August. And by the following morning, we will have the usual suspects claiming that the elections were rigged. Triple C. They may even challenge the results in the Constitutional Court, as they did last time. waste of time, of course, because we all know that the Constitutional Court is part of the regime. Just a week ago, the regime paid out a bonus of 400,000 US dollars to all the judges. The magistrates got a proportion of that, but the judges 400,000 US dollars. And these are the same judges who will be sitting in the Constitutional Court to decide the challenge of the election results. A waste of time. We all know what happened in 2018. The Constitutional Court. It was a charade. Complete, utter waste of time. We are going to see the same thing happen again. At the end of the day, the Constitutional Court will declare Zanu PF the winner. And the ordinary person will get to sit on the throne of thorns, as they've just been sitting for the last 43 years. This is the reality in Zimbabwe politics. The best way out of this is to denounce these elections for what they are. They are flawed and illegitimate. How can you have any meaningful elections without even something as basic as a verified vote? So denounce this process for being flawed and illegitimate. And we must also denounce the opposition for participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that their participation will only give legitimacy to Zanu PF. But that they are going ahead regardless, because they are after the few seats that are on offer to the opposition who dare to participate in these elections. Indeed, Mnangagwa has gone one step further since the 2018 elections. He is even rewarding the losing candidates of the presidential race if they announce that the elections were free, fair, and credible, and Mnangagwa is legitimately elected president, then they become a member of this new body called POLAD. And they will receive benefits. Last year, POLAD members received twin cab vehicle worth, I don't know, 40 or 60,000 US dollars. And they've been getting many other benefits. There was talk of POLAD members being given diplomatic passports. So you can understand why, although the nomination fee for presidential candidates is a mouth-watering US 20,000, still, we can expect next week, when the nomination day on the 21st of June. That's when the nominations will be taken in. We can expect at the end of the day that there will be quite a few presidential candidates, regardless of the steep nomination fees. No doubt, most of them are under no illusion that they would win the presidency. But they must be after the POLAD benefits. So this is the reality in Zimbabwe. These elections are a fraud. The ordinary Zimbabwean is getting nothing out of this flawed and illegal election process. The opposition leaders, those lucky enough to win some of these, the few gravy train seats that will be that are being offered to entice them to participate, will be smiling on the 23rd of August when the results are declared, because they will know that for the next 5 years, they're sitting pretty. The real sucker here is the ordinary Zimbabwean who will find themselves stuck with the regime, the Zanu PF dictatorship. Yes, we will have the usual business of the opposition complaining that the elections were rigged. But nobody will be listening. Nobody with half a brain will listen to that. Because the opposition knew all along that the elections were being rigged. And they didn't mind. They continued to participate because they were after the few benefits. The ordinary person, the ordinary Zimbabwean, are the ones who are going to pay and have always been paying the heavy price. They will find themselves stuck for the next 5 years with the Zanu PF dictatorship. They will be participating, thinking that by participating they are going to finally get rid of the regime, not knowing that it's reverse psychology. They want them to participate to give the regime legitimacy. The results are already fixed, predetermined. There is no way Zanu PF can lose an election in which they control everything. Everything. The only protest the ordinary person can register here is, number one, not to participate in the elections. Number two, to denounce them publicly that this process is flawed and illegal. Number three, denounce the opposition for being sellouts. If people were to do those three things, I believe SADC leaders will find it very difficult to rubber stamp these elections and grant Zanu PF legitimacy again. I believe SADC will find themselves with no option but to revert back to the decision of 2008 when they told Zanu PF that they didn't have legitimacy and the country will need another GNU. If we were to achieve that, this time I believe the people will be smart enough to know the GNU's primary purpose is to implement the democratic reforms to ensure free, fair, and credible elections. And they will be smart enough to make sure that that task is carried out properly. That will be the achievement. If they participate, then they must know that they will be sitting in this chair, which is the chair they've been sitting on for the last 43 years. They'll be sitting on it for 5 more years. Food for thought. Thank you very much and good night.